You on your best behavior, Jen?
I always am.
Okay.
How come women are always on best behavior, except for, never mind.
You got some rowdy women.
Yeah, I know.
Like the director is saying something. Producer.
Woohoo!
Yeah.
Welcome to the Trailer Park Show. Wow, I really missed you guys.
Well,
And happy post-Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you. It's been an exciting time. Happy Monday to everybody. And you know what? I really thought the weather was going to be a little bit warmer today, but it's a little bit more cloudier, and those clouds were a little darker. I know it's supposed to rain later this week, but I'm like, where's the sun at?
Yeah, well, the sun was out all weekend. On the side of 360, we decorated a couple trees yesterday.
Cool beans.
Yeah.
What they look like now? What they like in the dark? You haven't seen them in the dark
It still
yet?
looks okay. I mean, they look fine. All we did was put some tinsel around them and hung some candy canes, and everything was still there when I drove by it today.
That's a big Austin tradition, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Awesome.
So were you part of a team of people who did that?
No. It was just me and my daughters and my boyfriend.
Wow. Well, tonight we've got an awesome topic we're going to talk about, but I'm not going to even announce it. I'm going to allow Pokey to announce what we're going to talk about tonight and introduce our guests.
How do you get asylum or something like this, right?
Finding Asylum.
Finding Asylum, that's it.
Finding Asylum.
Jennifer Breitbart. Why not?
So close.
Yeah, as we know before. Drabbant.
You should give her a nickname like Jen.
Jen.
It's the last
Well, I
name
think
that
you're
gets
trying to be, proper. Gary, we know down there from my Democrat friends. Don't get too upset, but I like to load it up with Republicans every now and then. Director, Travis County Republican Party, President.
You've got a whisper on this thing. Took Marilyn's over. Use Marilyn's for a minute while I go get a new one of these, all right? So
There you go.
Yeah, use Marilyn's for a minute.
Okay. Jennifer, President of Hill Country Republicans, Young Republicans.
Right.
Yay, we like that. We're just going to let you introduce yourself because you got 2 or 3 titles.
So for you can just call me Ben. So, of course, I'm the incoming and new Director of Public Relations for Hill Country Young Republicans, in addition to my day job, in which I'm the Central Regional Manager for the conservative youth organization Turning Point USA.
And what does that do?
So at Turning Point USA, we like to think of ourselves, we're on the front lines every single day, battling the left in academia. We're on over 1,300 college campuses. We host hundreds and hundreds of conservative events each year, extolling the virtues of free markets, limited government, and free people, and the Constitution to our young people that the left is targeting. We are on campuses all the way from UC Berkeley to Princeton and Cornell, and with this year, we're going to be bringing 4,000 students to a Student Action Summit in West Palm Beach with hosts like Mark Levin, Jordan Peterson, Don Jr., Charlie Kirk, Candace Owens, to teach them about the Constitution, free markets, limited government, and why America is the most exceptional nation in world history.
And why they shouldn't follow Bernie?
Exactly, yes.
You know what? And I know our subject is about something else. I just want to touch a little.
Absolutely.
I mean, how is it that millennials feel that socialism is the right answer? And number one, they don't know enough about being bound because it's nothing but bondage.
Yes.
And not to mention, as free bird spirit as millennials are or can be, they think that they're going to allow or want the government to run them.
Exactly.
Baby,
Exactly.
tell them.
No, exactly. And you've said
Leave
it perfectly. Yes.
Yeah.
And you have 2 millennials who can think correctly sitting right here.
And I'm like, why? I mean, and he's got such a huge millennial following.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but what is it do they think they're going to get out of socialism? What is it they think they're going to get out of the government running us?
Absolutely. Well, you've said it perfectly at the beginning. The reason why so many young people are socialists or identified socialists, actually, if you look at recent polls, more millennials right now would rather live under a socialist country than would rather live in a capitalist country or a country.
Tell them move.
Yeah.
Go ahead and move, baby.
I was talking with POKEY on the way over here, just about that What
whether I
do
like it or
these
not.
Jews think is so great about socialism?
So it's very interesting because it's how it's sold by the left today. So I'm on college campuses basically every other day, or a new college campus every day of the week, whether it's Texas A&M, to Texas State, to University of Texas, University of North Texas, Oklahoma University, LSU last week, Tulane. And it was essentially my job to go teach college students the values of American exceptionalism. What we find on college campuses now today is people have a misguided perception of socialism, and this is the sentiment that you receive with young people when you talk to them about free markets or about socialism. Is they'll typically come up to our table, and you can basically tell a socialist when you see one. If their hair is dyed and they have feminist power, I'm not going to assume they're going to be a Ted Cruz voter. But they'll typically say, well, what is Turning Point about, or what can Turning Point offer me? I'll give them a very, very simple message. I will say, Turning Point USA, and conservatives are here to be sure that the government gets the heck out of your life because you run your life better than some bureaucrat 3,000 miles away in Washington. And I'll typically get two responses.
I'm just going to do one little stop here. Everybody move back from their microphone a little bit.
Was it a little too loud?
No, these are ultra sensitive, and so our man in the field who's watching TV just wanted to know. Thanks, Anthony. Go ahead and tell me if it gets better now. So go.
Awesome.
Okay.
So I'll essentially tell them, I want to be sure the government gets out of your life because you run your life better than any politician could. And then I'll typically get two responses to that. One, that's absolutely fantastic. How do I join Turning Point USA? Where can I come out? What can I do to start? And then I'll get a follow-up to that typically. But wait a second, I'm a Bernie supporter. This isn't a conservative group, right? Because what the left has done so effectively is they've taught the people who want to tell you what kind of car you can drive, how much money you can make, what kind of gun you can own, how big your house can be, what your energy bill can be, all the way down to what kind of light bulb you can buy and what kind of health care you can buy. These are, in fact, the people that want to get the government out of your life. That is such a culturally resonated message, and that is why the left co-opted it. Because what I like to say is, if we have 30 minutes, the conservatives obviously win the argument. But if we only have 30 seconds, the left wins the argument. Because the left has figured out the most potent messages to young people and has been able to co-opt them and has been able to make them effective. Now, what we as a right need to do is to be able to ensure that our messages are concise, are potent, but most importantly, attract young people. So that's what I do with the Hill Country Young Republicans and what I will do with Turning Point USA.
Wow.
Hold on a minute. We had nobody talk that fast in a long time.
I know, he talks fast.
We got it.
Yeah, I had a question way back at the beginning.
Yes.
So we don't even. Okay, don't talk so loud.
Oh,
Okay,
So I
so
don't even go there.
so we have,
Keep going.
so I'm going to switch a little bit here, but
Yes, ma'am.
he didn't say a word.
okay. Can I talk?
Go ahead.
We'll find out.
Okay.
She'll
So,
always leave so bad.
but I'm super excited to have been on board. Like, the ideas that he's starting to come up with, I just think it's going to be awesome. Next year is going to be a blast, I think, and we're going to do a lot of good things.
Well, you know, it's not just the millennials. It's the older people, too. I have a lot of friends that are on the left, and that's their prerogative.
Mhm.
I'm not here to try to change them. But my whole thing is, you need to look at the full picture. Do you want the government to run you, tell you what you can do? All this stuff you ran down. I'm an adult, older adult than you are. And I know we're not supposed to curse on here, but I'm going to say, hell no. I don't want the government trying to tell me and run me to do
You're not
anything.
here. I didn't
Well,
see that one.
well, you know what
You
I'm
didn't get that
saying.
memo, yeah.
But here's the deal. If we don't, I love what you're doing because we've got to get the word out. People have to understand really what's at stake.
Right.
This is supposed to be a Democrat government. And how is it that you want to go back into some days, go back somewhere else, and move?
Yes.
Tell them just move.
Yes. Let me just say that I'll be the first to inform a lot of these millennials that tend to be socialists or tend to be Bernie bros that if you don't like it in America, let me be the first to announce that there are planes leaving every airport every hour on the hour. So if you don't like it here, you can get on one.
Thank you. And you just can't go into their. You have to have your papers with you now. You just can't go
Yes,
in. It's
absolutely.
not an open border.
Oh, no, absolutely. We for all this talk of America being such a xenophobic race, nation rejecting the caravan, being anti-immigrant. We accept and welcome more immigrants than any other nation on earth and has for the rest of the time. We naturalized well over 1 million American citizens. That's when you're even incentivized to come here legally every single year.
Right.
With these other protests, they just butt in here and then we'll go in there and get the videos up and running. It was funny to hear people talking with all the protests that we've had in the past years or so about and some of these kids that are talking about being socialistic. One of the things I remember the most is one guy said, you know, if you own 5 houses and can only live in one and can't use those other houses, we deserve to live in those houses. Do these young kids realize that the work farms, the worse than worse housing that these work farmers were put into? Socialism isn't the way to go.
It goes back to the point that the reason why so many young people are attracted to socialism is because they've never lived it or never experienced it.
They expect a free house.
But I want to go back to something you just said very quickly. Yes, exactly. That's what they expect: is free food, free housing, free education. Well, nothing is ever free because it has to be paired for somebody else.
You just said my point. Ain't nothing, and I'm not gonna even. I'm just gonna say. Ain't nothing free.
Exactly. But I want to go back to something you just said earlier about how many of your friends who tend to be on the left. Well, this is not going to be your grandfather's Democratic Party because, of course, all liberals are on the left, but not all people who are on the left are liberal. And here's the distinction that I make. Liberals believe in free speech. Leftists believe in censored speech. Liberals believe in a colorblind society. Leftists believe in a society that utilizes identity politics. Liberals believe in equal rights. The leftists believe in class rights or racial rights, or they would push things like white privilege. And to sum it all up, liberals believe that even though we may have some differences on the size of government and economics, the American exceptionalism is a force for good and a blessing on the world stage. Leftists believe that America has traditionally been and still is a hindrance and a cancer on the world stage. That's the fundamental difference. And so we're not opposed to liberals more than just a few arguments. What we're trying to fight and save America from are leftists.
Yes.
And we know that the majority of those leftists are supporting this caravan that came through Teal right now. And they're kind of just stuck there. They thought that when they showed up, that the U.S. was going to say, okay, fine, you can come in. And they
California, maybe?
Right. And that's one of the points. Why did they go all the way to California when Texas was actually closer?
I can answer that one.
Go ahead.
They're called the Zetas. They just butcher up pretty bad. You're going to work for them or else, and usually you're going to work for them till you're dead. They don't care where you come from.
Right.
They recently killed about 78 of them
Wow.
in Mexico.
Well, another thing.
Hold on, one more real quick. These drug cartels, they don't want you to walk down there. It makes it very bad for business.
Yes.
All the extra security, comes with it.
But that's an excellent point to go into because if you listen to specifically the left-wing types, so you listen to the long types from Hollywood, we would have been convinced by now if they had their way that these are just poor innocent women and children that are fleeing violence and are just seeking asylum in the United States. Well, a couple points on that. Counting the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City, there are 11 consulates, and including our embassy, throughout the country of Mexico, all the way from the border to our border with Mexico. Now, you go ahead. They could apply for each and every one of them, but they do not.
Some of the news we never heard about. Someone threw a grenade at one of those consulates.
Yes.
Yesterday, day before.
Wow.
Well, they've done some other damage too.
Absolutely.
Well, the makeup.
I forget where it was.
The makeup of the caravan isn't just like you said, like innocent women and children. It was just came out. There's a convicted murderer in there, who was trying to get back into the U.S. He was deported from here. There is MS-13 members, and most of the people in the caravan are like military-age men. It's not younger people, or it's not like super young people. It's not kids. It's not older people. It's mainly men. So mid-20s to mid-30s. And
you can see this with the media. Like everybody from Fox News to George Ramos and Univision has announced that the caravan is primarily males in their 20s and 30s, and that they are not seeking refuge from violence. They are fleeing for economic opportunities in the United States. Now, if you want to flee for economic opportunities in the United States, we have one of the greatest economies in the history of the world right now, thanks to the free market policies of the Trump administration. Now, if you want to come legally to reap the benefits of them and to be a productive member of society, you're more than welcome to come. But you are not eligible to apply for asylum if you are here just for opportunities or seeking welfare benefits. And I actually want to pivot to that very quickly because at the end of the day, at its peak there were about 7,000 migrants in the caravan. Well, that amount comes every single month and more. Now, so what are the negative effects of so many illegal immigrants entering the United States? So there was a study recently done by the Federation for American Immigration Reform and found that through social services, through welfare, through fraud and abuse, the United States federal government spends $116 billion each year on illegal immigrants. $10 billion here in the state of Texas, which is the second most amount behind California at $23 billion. And what they found was the single largest line item of expense was educating the children of illegal immigrants. $44 billion for education was spent on illegal immigrants.
Back all that up.
Well,
So if you want to look at this report, a good friend of mine actually worked on this. It's from the Federation of American Immigration Reform, a study on the effects of illegal immigration and most specifically the costs of it for 2017. So I imagine it's even more so this year.
Well, you understand my lefty white friends over there. There's more white people in the Ozarks than these illegal coming across.
It's estimated.
Deflective speech technology.
No, that's absolutely true.
It's estimated that there's like 16 to 29 million. That's a very wide gap. And of course you can't count them. Like, they're not going to let themselves be counted. But that's the estimate right now for 2018. That's huge. That's a huge amount.
But the Census Bureau has proposed that they do be counted.
Yes.
And I would say to Democrats, what are you afraid of? This is the federal government coming to count people so that they can provide services. And you trust the federal government, don't you? And, and we do want, everybody wants to know the number. If you could somehow find out the real number, it would be good for everyone. And I think that they are on the wrong track when they say that they don't want this question to be part of the census.
Absolutely.
Right.
I think we were really not talking about something different before we got to this particular subject, in the sense that I think what's appealing to young people is the moral power of doing something for somebody who doesn't have as much as you do.
Oh, that's exactly
and so socialism is to, at first glance, a way of taking care of people who can't care for themselves in some way. So if these people weren't part of a caravan of aliens, if they were people who were Americans who came to your back door and said, we're hungry, or we're being pursued by someone, we like to think that people are kind and would take care of each other. What they don't seem to understand is that the reason that we have these billions and billions and billions of dollars to take care of these people is because of capitalism. Mm-hmm. It's not socialism that produces that. So you have to have capitalism, which again, on paper, it sounds like selfishness or something, but we've tried this. It's been done everywhere. We've had the Soviet Union, we've got Venezuela today, and when you say to someone, work as hard as you can, make as much as you can, and we'll take most of it away from you, somehow people stop working.
And that kind of goes back to, I guess, a lot of the millennials, or even younger than millennials, they're guided by emotion and feelings. Mm-hmm. It feels good to help people that have less than you and try to bring them into somewhere where they have a better opportunity. Mm-hmm. It just makes them feel good. And but they don't understand that if you let all these people in, I mean, what's going to happen? And how can you really, if people don't even have IDs, a lot of them aren't carrying identification, how do you background check the people you're letting in?
Well, that's true. And what really bothers me is that you're leaving a socialist place where you're running from.
Right.
And then you come in here, and then how we've been talking about how some want to make our country socialist. That's stupid.
And they've been talking about how, okay, so I said they don't carry IDs, a lot of them. Well, a lot of them have been deported, so they're trying to get back in, and they've been told to make up a new name.
Exactly.
So there are people that have been kicked out, and now they're lying to try and get back in. They're trying to get around the immigration laws. They were told to present themselves, right? At the border, they were told to present themselves, and they try and force their way in to the country instead of just peacefully presenting themselves.
Yes.
I don't know. I'm sure everyone saw that picture of the woman with her 2 kids. Like,
Yeah.
and
See how the photographers are behind her though?
yeah, and
Oh, that hill there, potatoes.
She's running from the
but
tear
that picture. So
Take a picture of
so
the
there is a
road.
reporter that actually found her in the Tijuana camps
Yeah.
and talked to her, and she said that she saw an advertisement for the caravan on TV in Honduras. Like, I was like, oh my goodness.
That's why they got on it.
Yeah.
And not to mention, at Tijuana, I believe it is Tijuana, they're saying, we don't have no more money to feed
They
y'all.
don't want them
We don't
there.
have. It's over.
There were protests that started. That it was Tijuana first. They're wearing hats that said Tijuana first, and they started protests against the caravan because they're saying, okay, we have homeless people, our citizens. We have homeless citizens. We have people that are struggling to eat 3 meals a day and maybe don't have a roof over their head. And yet these people come and they get these 3 meals a day. They get a roof over their head. Now, it's not very nice, the roof over their head that they get, but it's still something to protect them from the weather. And Tijuana citizens are saying, hey, this isn't fair. And they're finally starting to see what I feel like our mindset is towards that. When you actually are experiencing it, then it changes.
Exactly.
I wish one of us knew more about the history of asylum law. I think it starts out being this idea that if someone swims here from some terrible country where they've been targeted, the way, say, Soviet dissidents were targeted, then they should be able to go into an embassy and say,
Yes.
here's my name in a foreign paper, and they're saying that if they can catch me, they're going to torture me,
Yeah.
Right.
and then they're going to kill me.
Yeah.
And we as
That's
Americans
emergency.
Yes.
have all agreed we want to give that person asylum, shelter, sanctuary. We want them to be okay here.
But they
And-
passed through a whole country. They
Well,
went through
that's what
Mexico.
I'm unsure why the law says that you can apply for asylum no matter how you got here. It seems like it ought to be required to present yourself at an
At the
embassy
first.
or another facility a long way away. Now, again, if somebody ends up bumping into the coast on a raft and they can say, yeah, well, I tried on these days to get close to that and I was followed and that sort of thing, then I'm interested in listening to them.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is one of numbers, I think, because we do have more immigrants than any other country in the world, and we can absorb 1 or 2 or maybe 3% of growth. But we're 300 million people, and there are how many billions in the world now?
Right.
How many?
And
6, 7?
Can I?
So there's 1,000 times more people who could be better off. I wish they could all come over here and live like we do.
And there were other countries, like for example,
They can't. It doesn't matter whether they can't. We can't absorb 1 billion or 2 billion people. It'd be nice if we could.
I wish their government would do the right thing.
And
Well,
there
and
are
that's-
countries who thought that they could absorb other countries. If you look at Germany, for example, they thought that they could take in all those refugees,
Well.
and they're having all
Yes.
kinds of issues.
Oh, yes.
People are protesting against them in the other countries, and then they're backtracking on that. And then anti-open border parties now overseas are winning elections
Yes,
because
exactly.
they see how disastrous it's become.
Exactly, and this is what happens when you encourage immigration for people who are not going to assimilate to your country. Obviously, what's going on in Europe now in terms of open-ended Muslim migration into Europe is obviously a different scenario than what we face on the southern border, but it is similar in the fact of who you let into your country.
Yeah.
If you look at the types of immigrants that Europe is currently accepting, I'll give you an example. So a few years ago, a Danish cartoonist drew a picture of the Prophet Muhammad. Now, there was a poll done recently of second-generation Muslim British immigrants in which they asked, should the Danish cartoonist who drew a picture of Muhammad be prosecuted? 75% of them said yes. So you are not bringing in...
Second generation?
That's second generation. The second generation is typically more radical than the first generation. And they also did a previous poll in which they asked Muslim immigrants to Britain, is it acceptable to have homosexuality in this society? Not do you believe in traditional marriage? Is it acceptable at all? They could not find a single Muslim to say yes, it is acceptable. The poll rounded out at 0% yes. So they asked a follow-up question: what percentage of you think that homosexuality should be outright criminalized? These are sodomy laws. That 50% said yes, it should be outright criminalized, and we should put people in jail for engaging in this behavior. Anytime you accept a bevy of immigrants into your country, you have to go through a certain process in which to naturalize them and accept them into the culture. If you do not, that's what you see in riots in Cologne, riots in Malmö, in Sweden, in Britain. This is how a country fundamentally falls apart, and it's gotten so pernicious that certainly before the end of the century, Europe is going to be more Islamic than it is going to be Christian.
But the thing of it is that is their goal to do that.
Mm-hmm.
The Muslims, that is their goal to do that, to take over, and not to mention, of course, Sharia law is already there.
So this might sound like a conspiracy theory until you read back some of the old quotes of Gaddafi in which he would say that by Allah's grace we may actually conquer Europe without the sword. Of course, Erdogan famously said it several years ago at a rally of Turkish Muslims in Germany. That is a national disgrace to assimilate to Europe. So there are many, many leaders that have a stake in making sure that there is a cultural shift in Europe, whether it's Saudi-funded mosques, whether it's Iranian terror attacks, whether it's mosques funded by Erdogan from Turkish immigrants. There is a real demographic and cultural shift happening right now in the European nations right now.
Yes.
Now, of course, this is a little different, but it goes back from what we are facing right now. But it does hearken to the fact that whenever you bring masses of immigrants into the country that hold values that are antithetical to Western civilization or your nation's values, that is fundamentally going to disrupt your nation. And Europe is a test case for that. We cannot have that here.
And the thing too is when we on this subject, look at Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
yes.
that just had a ride up there
Yes.
not long ago.
Yes.
Yeah, we're getting off the subject. We got to play the film, and I wanted to ask about Sisi.
Yes.
Sisi made the the leader of Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
New Year's last year before, when he said that we got to do something because we're associated with all that. So, is there any movement going on? The secularism and no, that's completely off subject. Go ahead, play anytime, Mo. I'll turn it up. It's a 2-minute film. Okay.
But going back to CC very quickly, it's right now there is currently an alliance forming, a de facto alliance between Israel, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Jordan to counter the Iranian bulwark that is now forming in the Middle East. Partially because, or actually mainly because of the absence of a strong American foreign policy from our last president. So right now, many of these nations are at the forefront, or at least their governments are, of fighting radical Islamic terrorism and actually partnering with Israel to do so. Because while they may not be too fond of Israel, they understand that Israel is not the one trying to actively wipe them off the face of the earth.
Thank you. I know Iran is a really sorry one because they're the ones who want to be free as a Muslim. They got girls stand up on traffic things over there and take their scarves off.
Oh yes. Yes, the woman who did so in the most recent protest, she was actually jailed for and given a 10-year jail sentence for prostitution because she ripped off her hijab in protest of the Ayatollahs in Iran right now. Now, of course, the good news is that Iran may be on its last death rows because right now over the last few years, and especially since the sanctions have kicked in this past October, more and more Iranians are feeling the pinch and blaming the government and not the West, not Israel, not any other terror groups. They are blaming the Ayatollahs running the government for their miserable situation in life.
Good.
And right now, we may not even have to have any foreign invasion. We may not even have to have any diplomatic intervention. Iran may topple on its own.
They're pretty good at cracking down on dissent there. Are we ready or what?
She'll let us know.
All right, let me know.
So my thing is,
Just start playing it when it's ready.
we've got so much.
Right,
There's so much that we need to really get under control.
Yes.
And I mean, we need to get
Where do we
under control
start?
now.
Where do we start?
Well, we need to start with not allowing them to come in, and thank God for President Trump.
Mhm.
And it doesn't have anything to do, huh? Oh, he's fine.
Pause for technical difficulties.
So the thing of it is that it's not that we don't have love and affection for
Yes.
humanitarian. That's not even
Right.
it. But the thing
Yes.
is that if I want to travel to another country, I don't care what country it is. If I don't have my passport, I'm not going anywhere.
And
So-
it's not like our process. Now it may take a while to be a U.S. citizen, but the process to getting that isn't that difficult. It's okay.
It's really not.
So first you have to have a green card.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have to apply. Now there's a $640 application fee and then an $85 fingerprinting fee. Okay, and then you'll get scheduled an interview. You go to the interview. That's where they take you through the citizenship test. They test your knowledge of English, and then after that, you attend the oath ceremony. And the oath ceremony is where you're officially become a U.S. citizen. So those are the steps that you take. Now I don't know what the average length of time you spend between filing the form and then actually getting a citizenship appointment, but the actual process isn't difficult.
Mm-hmm. And I actually want to touch on something really quick. I want to go back to the compassion issue because I want to adamantly reject the idea that the conservative position on this is not adamant on twofold. One, if you are, let's take the mother we were recently talking about that was famously photographed running away from the border with her 2 children. So if you're a mother, why on earth would you risk your children being trafficked, traveling over thousands of miles? According to Amnesty International, women that cross the border are raped to the tune of 80% are raped if you cross the border.
And she has 3 other kids.
And she has 3
home,
and
by
she
the
has
way.
3 other kids that left at home. And even if you but you did not go to any legalized border crossing. You did not go to any place where you can apply for asylum, whether it's at a border crossing or whether it's at a consulate. You specifically brought your children to what is essentially a riot in order to get photographed. How is that showing compassion? And then on the other side of the border, when I go around to the colleges to meet with chapters and meet with student leaders, what I find, especially in Texas, is that a huge percentage, if not the majority of them, are either Hispanic or immigrants from other countries, and that are conservative as well. But what they will tell me how, as children, they came into the United States, they waited in line, their parents were not eligible for welfare because they had just come into the country, so they had to start their own businesses or they would be put out on the streets. They had to pay thousands of dollars and wait sometimes 10 years in order to become citizens. They did it by the book, and they are enraged at the idea of somebody who's going to jump over the border and jump up ahead of them and essentially discredit everything they did. Now, the reason why I say I reject the idea that we're not compassionate. I feel it's compassionate to reward people who have played by the rules, who have come in legally, who want to be contributed and peaceful members of society. It's compassionate to create a system, and obviously I'm for immigration reform. When there's problems, we need to reform it, but we need to do so that it benefits the people who have played by the rules and want to contribute to society, not people who want to jump on the border to instantly go on welfare benefits. That is not compassion. That is dependence.
And they have no thoughts of even assimilating into our country. That's not their plan.
Yes. So, and it's certainly convenient for the left over the last 20 years to switch their position on immigration. If you watch old State of the Union address by Bill Clinton, even by Barack Obama, they would rail, whether it's Chuck Schumer in 2009, Obama in 2006, Bill Clinton in 1996, they would rail against illegal immigrants whether it's taking jobs, going on welfare, accepting jobs over legal citizens and legal immigrants. So the left has fundamentally flipped on this, and they have figured out, they knew how have a new bevy of people that they can victimize coming into the country and use it as a bludgeon over conservatives' heads. And you know this because of the most recent language used about the child separation policy. So whether or not it was useful or whether or not it was adequately applied, that's certainly a topic that we can discuss later on. But roughly 9,000 children were separated from the parents under a policy that was mandated by a judge under Obama's presidency, but about 9,000 were separated under the Trump presidency. 90,000, according to the Department of Health, according to the U.S. government, were separated under Barack Obama. And Barack Obama has actually deported more immigrants than President Trump has so far, and more so than George Bush did so far. Which do you think the language is directed at Trump, and what do you think the language is directed at Obama? The left has made this into a purely partisan issue so they can use this as a bludgeon over conservatives' head.
We're going to touch back. We're going to touch back with that.
Go ahead, Mom. I got to turn it up.
Hang on. Turn your TV up in there, remember?
10-4.
Yeah.
Here in Tijuana, and let me let you take a look at the sports center here. This is a Benito Juarez Sports Stadium that has the largest number of migrants of those 8,500 that Secretary Nielsen was telling us about. About 6,000, we believe, are in this actual stadium. In fact, we went inside a little earlier when people were sleeping to give you a look at just how tight these tents inside here are packed. The conditions are rough. We spoke to one of the migrants who had come out in the night walking around a little bit. He told me that food is getting a little scarce, water's getting scarce, and some people have been here for a week or longer. One of the interesting details we got from Secretary Nielsen yesterday in that statement was that they believe there's as many as 600 people with criminal history, and they also note, as I have observed so far this morning, a large majority of the folks that I am seeing here are like these guys right here. They're mostly male. You're not seeing the same number of women and children and families that we saw when I was with this caravan much in its earlier stages. We talked also, as you see and look around, there are houses here. There are Tijuanans that live here. We asked the gentleman going to work, I said, what do you think about this? He said, well, my heart goes out to them because they need help, but I don't want them here anymore. The U.S. and Mexico needs to get their act together politically and figure out something to do with these people, but this is the end of the road for them. And as we saw from that situation on Sunday, obviously the level of intensity has only risen here, and the Border Patrol officials on the other side clearly not going to tolerate another attempt like we saw on Sunday. We've learned Mexican officials say they deported about 98 of those folks arrested on this side of the border. Some 500 may have been identified. We'll find out what happens. A final note, Bill, I'll leave you with, and that is Pueblos Sin Fronteras, the largest organizing group assisting these people, has just put out a statement in the last hour where they basically are calling on the humanitarian organizations within Mexico to provide some shelter and protection for these migrants because they feel that they are at a higher risk now that the situation is elevated.
We're back.
We're back, right. So
We can talk over that next film, Mark. Just play it anytime.
So to comment on that very quickly, what was not shown in the in the video the most recently played was the residents of Tijuana that are now protesting en masse about the caravan that is currently living in their town or has stopped in their town. So, and it harkens back to the point that, okay, this is clearly not a racial issue. This is clearly an issue where people have economic concerns or national security concerns on both sides of the border. Those concerns are valid, and we have to take heed of this. But unfortunately, we cannot have that conversation because the left wants to use this as a tool to label all conservatives as racist, as xenophobic, as uncaring. But of course, I would want to ask the left, is if America is such a racist, xenophobic, inhospitable place, if it's so terrible, why are you trying to bring so many people into it? Because
take them to your home.
Yeah, that's such a point. If you care so much about these people, why don't you adopt your own philosophy? If you want to have open borders, live it in your own life. Accept anybody that wants to come into your home that wants a home. Why not live the philosophy you preach?
Oh, here we go.
What do you think, Jerry? Do you have something to say?
Well, yeah, I am unaware of any program that the government has set up to allow regular citizens to adopt someone the way businesses adopt immigrants in the H-1B visa program, which I've used. I've hired programmers with skills,
Yeah,
and
my
that's good for the
coworker
whole
actually has that. He's from
economy.
Spain.
But yeah, if and this again goes back to the much broader issue of socialism and leftists, if you will, to draw the distinction there. They want to be generous to these people, but they know that there is no political will to double everyone's taxes to pay these bills. So what they're doing is they're taking money from their own grandchildren. And so
that's so.
I don't think that you can call it
Look at them thugs.
generosity. You
They
can't
thugs.
call
They're
it.
tearing up
But the
stuff.
people who want to, as you said, take the money from their grandchildren, they're so young, they're pretty selfish right now. they're not thinking about that. They're only thinking about themselves. And I know everything that I do is I have my kids in mind. I want them to have an opportunity when they grow up that as long as they work hard, they will get the rewards.
I see that film.
But I just want to say this: there are 11 places, whether it's the embassy or the 10 consulates we have in Mexico, at which you can apply for asylum. You can apply for asylum at any boarding crossing. You can apply for asylum and any other nation that you had to get through between. Whether it's Guatemala, whether it's Belize, you can apply to any other nation. They specifically came to specific sections along the border in order to break in. One, for the media coverage they knew they would get, and two, just purely based on the fact that the vast majority of the migrants in this caravan would not have received asylum because they are economic immigrants. They are not fleeing persecution or violence. In fact, going back to the people that make up this caravan, whether it's the Department of Homeland Security, which has announced that human traffickers and cartel members are utilizing the caravan as a cover to come into the United States, or it's the government of Guatemala, which has recently announced the 100 ISIS members they have just recently arrested in this country. There are very, very real and valid concerns about the people who are using this caravan for their own purposes, and due to the fact that the people who are not eligible for asylum are now currently trying to stage riots on the border in order to enter. And it just goes back to the point: how is any of this compassionate? How is this showing any compassion? How is this giving a good name to any of the immigrants that want to come, be productive members of society, follow the rules, wait in line in order to become American citizens? I don't understand how this is viewed as an act of compassion in which the very first thing you do upon entering the United States is break the law, stage violent riots like this. How on earth is that compassionate?
Do we have facilities in the Mexican border towns for applying for asylum? It's my understanding that when they get to the border, the only way they can apply for asylum is to cross into the United States, and that's the part that just doesn't make any sense.
Every consulate, every embassy, and every border crossing, they can go into the offices, declare asylum, and wait through the proper legal process in order to receive it. That's not what they're doing. They're not going to any border crossings. They are not going to any consulates. They are instantly trying to jump over the border and throw rocks at border agents, as it was reported widely, whether it's by Fox or left-wing media sources, essentially staging riots in order to illegally enter the border. If we're to believe all the left-wing types in the media, in academia, in Hollywood, that these people just want to apply for asylum, why are the people on the ground doing everything they can to avoid applying for it?
Right. All they would have to peacefully present themselves.
They were already offered
Use
asylum.
the word peacefully, because I'm sitting up here thinking, no one's come over here and used the humble approach. These boys, you saw them. I mean, they are so violent.
Right.
Nobody. If
And
I
that's
needed
where
to
the
get to a
tear
place
gas-
so
no,
bad,
tear
I'm going to
gas
be
came
saying,
from.
please, can I come? I'm this, I'm that. I mean, where's the humble approach? Like you said, where's the peaceful approach? There's not one.
And frankly, it's a moot point because they were already offered asylum by Mexico. The Mexican government offered the caravan members full asylum, housing benefits, welfare, aid in order to help their cause. That was flat out rejected. That the moment that was rejected, this should have been evidently clear that this was not people seeking violence. It was people seeking media attention and entry into the United States illegally. That should have been clear from the get-go.
And we do know we live in the best country in the
Yes.
world.
We
So
do,
I
we
do
do.
get them wanting to come here, but
Well, I know that for many years, one of the things that you could declare asylum over was spousal abuse. Now,
You hear that, Mo?
I don't.
Right here.
Yeah, I think it's horrible that there are countries, including Russia, where husbands who want to beat their wives are sheltered by the law rather than prosecuted.
Right.
And I don't blame them for wanting to come to a country where we I think are not we have better attitudes about things like that. But the problem is, again, going back to the billions of people who live in those other places, we can't shelter everyone who has a partner somewhere on the other side of the globe who is behaving badly.
And okay. Well, I was gonna say the lady from the picture, she said one kid's dad is in the U.S. now, so she wanted to go find him.
One of the kids' dads?
One of them.
But actually, let's talk about this really quick, because a common argument utilized by the left is that immigration is a way to lift billions and billions of people out of poverty. And in a way it is, because obviously we naturalize more immigrants than any other nation on earth, and if we lifted all barriers to entry, then obviously millions, if not billions, more would try to come. Now, it's often presented as these people are suffering, poor, impoverished, and have no other opportunities, so the ones that are most aptly able to come to the United States should be able to come in order to alleviate world poverty. The reason why that's fallacious is, one, obviously in the United States, we're living in a welfare state. 63% of non-citizens are receiving some form of welfare right now. We are already spending $116 billion per year on illegal immigration. But let's go back to the argument very quickly of those people who want to become productive members of society are very, very apt and are going to start great businesses, contribute to the United States society, or at large. The problem with this argument is these people that are essentially the go-getters in their society are leaving their society. They are the talents and the resources they can provide back home are coming to the United States where they already exist, and they're leaving people in destitutions in the nations they already do. And right now there are literally billions and billions of people that are living in abject poverty, at least by the United States standards, abject poverty. We could not possibly absorb any of this. So if you want to alleviate the people, we would want to adopt policies like free trade, like free markets, embrace capitalism, because right now that has shown to be the single greatest alleviator of world poverty, not immigration.
If I could real quick, I can't because it'll be a whole other show. Some of my left friends tell me that this is all the result of U.S. foreign policy in Latin America.
So I'm not going to defend U.S. foreign policy. This is where I dare I say it. I might be a little bit of a libertarian. But in short, there were a lot of U.S.-backed dictatorships in Central and South America during the course of the 20th centuries. However, most of those have gone by the wayside and have done so for decades.
Real progress.
So social progress, no. Economic progress, yes, and specifically Chile. But nonetheless, the fact still remains that these governments folded decades ago. I mean, these are problems that if you wanted to make this argument, you're about 20 years too late. The fact of the matter is they are fleeing for economic opportunities in the United States because their governments have turned from very, very right-wing to very, very left-wing, and are now implementing the policies that we have derided here, and now want to come to the United States for its free market approaches. That's why they're coming here.
Just make your changes in your country. I mean, it's like it all goes back to the source.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's not our problem. They're not our problem. They belong to another country.
That's exactly
Get your stuff together. That's a burden for us to be able to open our borders and allow everybody to come in. Like you said, we already have homeless people here.
Let me actually just add something very quickly, because I also want to reject the idea that this labels the GOP or conservatives as anti-immigrant. We want to welcome immigrants. Immigrants can be welcome members of our society. Right now, Nigerian immigrants actually make more in the U.S. than native-born whites do. They went to get a similar college education. The highest earning group in America right now is Indian Americans that make on average over $100,000 a year. So if you are willing to come, if you want to become a productive member of society, we will welcome you with open arms, because the United States is not based on race. It is not based on origin. It's not based on background. It's based on do you accept and adopt the ideas of natural rights and are wanting to be a law-abiding and productive member of society. If you are, we will gladly take you. In fact, we will advocate to make it easier for you to come. If you are coming here and the first thing you will do is break the laws, get on welfare, and not be productive and not assimilate, then of course we do not want you, because that is an insult to the people who did it right.
Yeah. And there's a lot of other countries where people want to go to. They make sure you have to show you have a certain amount of money in your bank account.
Yes.
You have to show that you have a way to provide for yourself, because that country is not going to provide for
Yes.
you. There's a lot of stipulations that a lot of other countries have for people to come in, not to even be citizens. That can take a couple of years to be a citizen, but there's
Yes.
there's different ways that you can go in there and get a second visa, citizenship, dual, whatever. But there's still rules you have to follow in order to get into those countries.
Everywhere enforces their borders, and
Yeah,
that's
why
what
come
makes
we
a country.
can't? Why come we can't?
Right, exactly. And that's
Try to enter Mexico illegally from
And
Guatemala,
what you think will
into
happen?
the Mexican border.
Baby.
Most of the times they are shot, many are
Yes.
killed, many disappear, or maybe are outright deported. Like if for our stringent border policies, I notice the left has nothing to say about Mexico's stringent border policy. But I just want to add something really quick. Because I was recently talking to a friend of mine who's from Iraq and immigrated to the United States a few years ago. He first tried to immigrate to Oman. He was told that you have to have a certain amount in your bank account, that you have to wait 25 years to become a citizen, and then even then you're not given full rights. The citizenry of Oman is very, very much anti-immigrant. So it just goes back to the show that's obviously an anecdotal evidence, but it shows how welcoming and advantageous it is to come and be a United States citizen as compared to the rest of the world. We are the most welcoming of immigrants of any society in history.
And that's another reason that we're so wealthy. I mean, this has worked for us. We are the melting pot that we were taught when we were little kids.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And we
A
assimilate.
lot of us are-
I like to point out that if you want to know what a German looks like, you probably can guess, or a Nigerian, or a Japanese person, or a Swede. But if you say, what does an American look like?
Yes.
It could look like any of those people,
Yes.
and you would not be able to look at that person and say, no, they're not an American.
Absolutely. And let me actually touch on that very quick, because often another line used by the left is that we are a nation of immigrants, so why wouldn't we accept more immigrants? We are absolutely not a nation of immigrants.
Thank you.
We are not a nation of immigrants. We are a nation of law-abiding citizens, and the reason why that is so important is because unlike any other society in history, citizenship is not based on race, it is not based on religion, it is not based on origin, it is not based on the amount of money you have. It is, do you accept that the United States is founded on natural rights, and that you're willing to pull yourself off the bootstrap. It doesn't matter what color you are, what country you're from, what your ethnicity, what your religion is. If you are willing to do those things, you may become a citizen of the greatest nation on earth.
Can I give you a high five?
Yes. Yes, you may.
Dan, you're obviously a racist, homophobe.
Did you add a big call?
Probably call
Oh
out.
my goodness! I mean, racist, xenophobe. I love the fact that when I get called a Nazi, because then I get to explain to them that I'm probably the most Jewish Nazi they've ever seen, to the point to which they then.
Even what you're calling
Yes.
a Nazi, you're
Yes.
probably closer to Nazi
Yes.
than
Icing it on the top.
Icing on
And
the
that
top.
icing
Yes.
on the top is the truth.
Yes, absolutely. It's
Come on.
but.
Come on.
Fascist is another one. Nazi is another
Oh,
one. Then
okay.
when they find out I'm Jewish, I'm called either a Jewish racist or a Jewish Nazi. But it goes back to the point on whether it's this issue or others. The left uses these terms in order to bully conservatives into silence. Like, they're not calling you a racist just because they actually think you're a racist. They might think you're a racist, but they're calling you a racist most importantly because they think it's effective. And for many years it has, because conservatives are instant.
Of course it's effective.
Yeah,
It's
actually,
immensely
absolutely.
effective.
No, Gary, you explained this to me why it's effective one time, and I thought it was a great point. I don't know if you remember what you said.
I remember everything I've ever said.
Explain why it works.
Well, okay,
If-
how did I do it last time?
You explain better than me. If someone says you're racist because you're a Republican, why does that work?
Well, it works because you can't just skip over that. You have to stop and address that issue. I think that a lot of times Republicans start out a conversation saying, we have a $20 trillion debt and that's too much. And the other person says, and you hate women. And that's like their chess move. Right. And what are you saying? You can't say, oh, true, I hate women, but I also hate big spending. You can't just skip over that argument.
Yeah.
And that's the origin, I think, of the whole term, the race card. Once you play the race card, it's a way of stopping any kind of discussion after that. Because I'll tell you, once you're accused of being a racist, it's pretty hard to prove that you're not.
Yes, absolutely.
I can't prove that I'm not. And it just makes you look ridiculous if you say some of my best friends are
here's my black friend.
Let me add on to that.
And then they'll say, "Oh, you have a black friend. Now you're even more racist."
We need to talk about this another time.
Okay, go ahead.
There's going to be legislation coming up, and will you be working on it with part of your company you're with?
Yes, we'll be
Turning State House. I know Jennifer will be involved in it.
So Turning Point USA is a 501c3, so we endorse ideals and conservative values. We don't endorse policies, but with my capacity with the YRs, we will be working on crafting certain legislation, whether it's all the way from whether it's a constitutional carry to civil asset forfeiture to working with the legislature to finally pass a medical marijuana bill. There's a bevy of things that we hope to accomplish this legislative session.
Well, I'm sure I can get some of my Democrat friends to join us on there during the session, and we'll be able to have a...
Oh, it's going to be an interesting session. I can't wait.
Yes.
It's going to be fun.
I really like Teal. He's a pretty sharp dude.
Mm-hmm.
And he's pretty ready to come on.
Yeah, I would like to have him back.
He's pretty good, and there's some others. Some of them are a little crazier.
Yes. So is that we have a show for next week, right?
Next week's NH, it's going to be, what is his name? I can't remember now. I didn't write it down, and my phone's gone. It's NH Homeless. Can't remember the name of this newspaper. Oh!
Just keep talking. Skip the name. I'm going to look for it.
Are you getting the email?
To be continued. Yes.
Benjamin. That's you.
No, that's him.
That's him.
Yeah, thank you, Benjamin, for being on. We'll be asking you to come back on again.
Absolutely. Happy to be back.
I guess if you're communications, what now?
Public Relations Director.
Well, that's close enough. Then
Yes.
It's your job to come on shows like that.
Yes, I'll be happy to come back. I would love to come back and talk about more how the race card has been effectively utilized by the left and how conservatives can combat it.
And we didn't even touch on Nicaragua and how come none of these refugees from Nicaragua, you know about all that's going on there.
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
that's some other time too. I think she's coming on. I hope she's good for a lot more often.
I'm trying to
She's
find.
pretty good. What do you think, Marilyn?
Oh, she's cool.
Yeah, get more, and Gary Teal's going to have to buy more pizza next time. That's for sure, because they're homeless people.
I think I got a text message saying no pizza this week.
That's this week.
That's
Talk about
this
next week. And on the 17th, it's going to be birthday party time. Anyway, you got 10 seconds. Say bye, everybody.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye. Have a good evening.
Thanks for watching.
You're 10-4. And thank you, Anthony. We should be able to have this show up so you can, because I know Ben talked real fast, so you'll be able to listen to it later.
You can
Bye-bye.
listen to it at